Are you curious about what yoga looks like off the mat, or keen to hear how yogis all around the world live? This show will let you in on the secret that there's no such thing as a perfect yogi. Welcome to the Plant Powered Yoga Podcast. Please welcome your host, yoga teacher, coffee lover, vegan, and known as the Plant Powered Yogi, Jess Ivers. Hello everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the Plant Powered Yoga Podcast. My name is Jess. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today's episode is talking about yoga vocabulary and the things that you might have heard, or the things that even as a yoga teacher you might have even said before. All of these things that I'm going to talk about I have said in classes before, so this is all coming from my own experience of things that I've maybe said that I would now say a little differently with hindsight, which is a wonderful thing, and with more learning. And the thing with words is that they can land so very differently with so many people. And now things will never be perfect in the class, and you can't be expected to say and do everything right for every single person that you might have in your space. And that's absolutely okay, because remember, there's no such thing as a perfect yogi, and that includes as teachers, as facilitators, you are not expected to be perfect up in this pedestal that we sometimes put yoga teachers in. However, what yoga teachers say during a class can have a really big impact on students. And over the past few years teaching, and then being able to be in spaces where I'm learning from some other very well educated and well practiced teachers, how to slightly change my vocabulary while facilitating has opened my eyes and ears and mouth so much, and I'm much more mindful about what I might say now when I'm teaching. And you may remember in my last episode speaking with Ulrike that one of the most important lessons that I learned on my first yoga teacher training was about making my first words of the day mindful. And I try to apply this when facilitating in a space, that making sure what I'm saying is mindful and I'm not just talking for the sake of talking, which can be a really big part of facilitating, feeling nervous or feeling unsure about how much you should be talking, and being able to leave that silent space in a comfortable way. But for today's episode, I've narrowed down some buzzwords that I've heard and that I've used myself before, and what are some alternative offerings to those buzzwords. So I hope you enjoy hearing some of these. And again, this episode is a little bit more about just having a little poke of fun at the things that do get said and get thrown around during a yoga class. So I'm starting with one that is just an uncomfortable one, and I don't want it to come across as like I'm talking about this right now, because it's a bit of an on theme thing, but it's about using pronouns. And it's something that I guess I'd never really considered and never really thought about much when I first became a teacher, because 3 years ago things were a lot different in the way that you'd refer to people in a space. So that's definitely something that, as I've grown as a teacher and as a facilitator, that things have definitely moved around in that space a lot more. And I thought I'd start by sharing a story, and doing this is kind of like ripping off a band-aid, because it's a really uncomfortable story for me, that I was pulled up by a student once about using pronouns and referring to the students in the room as ladies and not as people. Yeah, I'd really narrowed down the gender, I guess, of the class. And this student sort of pulled me up on it, and it was the first time anyone had ever done that, and I was very embarrassed and very humiliated, because I'm not someone who would ever try and marginalize anyone in my classes. And as soon as that person left, I burst into tears and went home and felt very sorry for myself the whole afternoon, which probably wasn't the best thing to do. But regardless, it was a real wake up moment, I guess, in a way, the more that I think about it. And the thing is, I didn't even notice that I had used the word ladies in the class until they mentioned it. So it's one of those things to me that I really didn't actually know I was even doing it. It was just so ingrained into my vocabulary. So it's now become something that I'm more conscious of. So as horrible as it was to have someone call you out on making a mistake like that in a class, I also now use that opportunity to switch my vocabulary a little bit and to, again, be more mindful about what I might be saying. So, alternative offerings, if you're like, well, what do I say when I have a class that you might assume is a group or a room full of women or men? So rather than referring to them as women, men, ladies, guys, you can say things like people, hey folks, good morning everyone, how's it going yogis? Lots of different alternatives to men, women, ladies, guys. And I know that saying, hey guys, is also a really common phrase and one that I'm again trying to pull myself out of. But, and this isn't necessarily something that you will do right or wrong. And this is not a thing of, oh, well, if you ever refer to your class as ladies, you're going to be banned from yoga teaching. And it's also being mindful about the spaces in which you might be teaching as well. Another word that I don't like using, and again from my own experience, I was rewatching a video of mine on YouTube recently and had noticed that I'd used the phrase, you should be feeling the stretch here, when I was in a pose. And I listened to that and I heard that and I cringed internally because I thought, that's not my job to be telling people where they should or shouldn't be feeling a stretch. And in my body, yeah, sure, that's where I feel a stretch, but anyone watching that video might not feel the stretch there. So using the word should, so you should be feeling the pose here, or you should be feeling the stretch here. You should be able to feel this openness. You should be able to put your back foot down. Notice when saying things like should changes the way your brain thinks about what your body can be doing. As a yoga teacher, it's not my job to be telling my students where or when they should be feeling something, but instead be offering that to them in a way that's supportive. So an alternative offering to the word should might be could, maybe, might, perhaps. You could place your back foot down here. You might be able to feel a stretch coming through the outer left leg. Perhaps you notice something going on in your right foot. And this is something that I've really enjoyed learning about because it just opens up so many more opportunities. So rather than you should be doing this, it really opens up this kind of little starburst of things that students might be able to feel. This next one is one that has ground my gears for a really long time. And I'm of the opinion that unless you're referencing Lizzo in a yoga class or in a yoga studio, I don't really want to hear the word juicy for that 60 minutes while I'm practicing. And it's such a common word that I hear, especially in yin classes and especially in any soft or slow classes, that anytime there's a hip opener, you can feel this juicy stretch into the hips. And I just really don't like it. And this might just be like a completely personal view. I don't know if this is a common thing amongst other people. Using words that usually you describe food with and then using that to describe how a body should be feeling just feels a bit off to me. Another word that is used in this context is delicious. And again, it's coming back to that, you should be feeling this delicious stretch. I'm not really sure what is delicious about a stretch. I'm still yet to figure that out. But they're two of the words that I really don't love hearing and just for some reason doesn't sit right with me. So if I was teaching a hip opener or something that was quite, say, a deep stretch where the option of saying this is a juicy stretch or this is a delicious stretch might be a notice any sensations that you might feel here. This is something that I've picked up from my wonderful teachers Jo and Maylai during my Yoga for Humankind training. And again, it's one of those kind of light bulb moments of, this is so nice of offering your students something that they might be feeling, noticing what they might be feeling. Some more buzzwords: jump or float. Now have a think about how many times you might have heard that in a vinyasa class especially. Jump to the back of your mat. Float from downward facing dog through to standing forward fold. I'm 6 foot tall and I'm over 80 kilos. I don't float, and anything that requires jumping generally also requires a heavy duty sports bra. So when I'm in a yoga class, that is the last thing I want to feel like I have to do, is be jumping and almost pounding the pavement, so to speak, getting to the front and back of my yoga mat. The thought of jumping in a yoga class does seem a little off to me, because to me, and again, this is all my personal experience, is that yoga is about a bit more of a slower pace, and it's about embracing some softness. So any time that there might be some sort of harsh movement, it makes it feel for me like there's some sort of energy shift that shouldn't be happening in that space. Jumping also can place a lot of pressure on people's joints and can cause injuries. And not that I've seen this happen, say, in any of my classes, but I've noticed that the couple of times that I've done it, I'm like, this actually just doesn't feel good. Like, I'm not floating, I'm jumping, I feel heavy. For me, again, it's about embracing that softness, embracing the slowness, knowing that there's time to move back and forth. And I think for me, the whole jumping aspect comes into everything's a rush to get back, to get forward. It's okay to be a little bit slower. This can also be relevant to any time that there might be an inversion practice in a class. So anytime you might hear a teacher say you can kick up into a headstand or float up into your tripod headstand. Floating, jumping, kicking, even just the word kicking, I really don't like either. Using that in a yoga context is really inaccessible for a lot of people. So a couple of words there that just might need a little bit more softening. So an alternative offering for this would be to step or find your way back, find your way forward, giving your students that opportunity to find their own way. And that might be jumping or floating if they're okay with doing that. And again, we can't tell people what they can and can't do with their bodies, but offering them to find their own way means that they're doing it on their own terms, and it's not up to me to dictate how they do that. And the last little buzzword, so to speak, that I've heard used many, many times is that if you can't do this, just stick with level 1. If doing this isn't for you, maybe just stay with option 1. Using levels like that make it seem like it's much more than the experience and the journey, as it is about getting to the end goal. And using levels like that is also quite limiting to people who are of different abilities and of different stages of their practice. And also saying, if you can't do this, there might be days on the mat where I might be able to come to, say, what looks like a perfect yoga pose, but I don't really feel like doing it, or I might not be in the space, I might be injured, I just might not be feeling that. So it's also quite limiting being like, oh, well, if you can do this, or if you can't do this. It's like, well, I can do it, but I'm just choosing not to today. And it also places the poses on this hierarchy that only a peak pose or the end goal is what's important in a yoga practice. So instead of coming to, say, a full king dancer's pose where your arms are behind your head and you're holding your foot and you're reaching up, that's the only thing that's important. If you can't do that, well then, why did you even come to class today? Instead of maybe standing on one leg and maybe holding onto your foot with one hand on the hip. Now, I'm a big believer in offering options in class, which is super, super important, but it's also mindful to stay true to yoga, remove the ego from the practice, and using numbering. So anytime there's like option 1, option 2, option 3 is just a little bit icky. And that might be also uncomfortable for people if you're in a class or in a space where offering levels and people hearing that might be triggering or quite uncomfortable for them. So an alternative offering to using levels, for an example, I would say in this instance, there are a couple of options in this next sequence and a number of shapes that you might want to take. And here are some of the examples. So these are just some of the vocabulary changes and things that I've picked up in my own teaching practice over the years, and some of the ones that I guess I make a real conscious effort to adapt to in my classes and when I'm in a teaching space. And again, referencing that thing I said right at the start, that there's no such thing as being a perfect yogi and knowing that you'll make mistakes, and I will still probably keep making mistakes. And sure, I can keep going until I feel like I've got it right and comfortable in a space, and the next time that maybe a student does come up to me and wants to say correct or pull me up on something that they weren't super comfortable with, I'm also going to be better equipped to handling that than having a breakdown after class. So I hope you enjoyed listening to today's episode, and if you also were like, ugh, I hate that word, please feel free to let me know. If there's any other buzzwords or things like that you hate hearing or using in a yoga space, I'd love to hear your feedback on this. And this is the second last episode for this season. There'll be one more episode next week. An interview with the lovely Shay Lamond, who joined me all the way from Bali, and looking forward to sharing my chat with her next week. In the meantime, stay safe, keep up your yoga practice, whatever that may look like, at home, in a safe space, hopefully. And I'll see you all again next week.
Thanks again for listening to the Plant Powered Yoga podcast. For more information, visit plantpoweredyoga.com or visit the show notes below. I'd love it if you could rate, review, or even share this podcast with a friend. Thanks so much for helping create a kinder world, and see you next time.